Giving feedback can be painful and receiving feedback can be painful. Oftentimes we get defensive. That's not necessarily a great thing. Why? Because as a leader, particularly, it can impact your credibility and it shuts down the process of receiving feedback, which you actually could find very helpful. That's what we're going to talk about today: how not to be defensive and how to be open when it comes to receiving feedback. We'll do giving feedback on a different video. My name is Dr. Nina Ahuja. My mission is to empower you with tools and strategies to help you respond and not react, so that in your interactions, you can create environments where people feel valued, seen, heard, and respected. Receiving criticism. Why is it that we get defensive in the first place? I remember being in a meeting many years ago when, as a department, we were actually trying to prevent an initiative from going through because we believed that it was not going to be in the best interest of the department or the patients that we served. In the meeting, there were a number of us around the table. There were some key senior executive people as well who were presenting the idea, to whom which we had the opportunity to then provide some feedback. I was one of the spokespeople for the group, and so in my delivery of the message that we had concerns and why we had concerns, one of the senior people on the other side of the table immediately said, "That is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. You know nothing about business." Well, I was taken aback by that. However, I was prepared in the sense that I knew it was a controversial issue. It was going to be met with resistance. And so my response to that was, "It's good to know how you feel about that, but this is why we feel the way we do." And I went on to provide reasons. Now, the initiative that they were hoping to bring forward as senior leaders and senior executives at the organization did not go through. We were able to present our case well enough such that the department was successful in holding that back so that we could maintain the standards and ethics that we wanted to. What was interesting, though, about that interaction is I never forgot that moment. It's a moment that I refer to as a leadership defining moment where it was so striking to me, and that resistance was so strong, and it was met with a reactive response that was delivered in public that could have impacted my ability to share my perspectives on behalf of the department in a way that could have worked against us. It was a moment that I thought, wow, this is really interesting to note. And I never have forgotten about that when it comes to that particular individual. So that when I talk about things like this impacting credibility, after that incident, any time that I heard that person speak, I more than took it with a grain of salt. And what I mean by that is I questioned if the person had really been able to think through the scenario, all factors considered, for and against, to really be in a position of neutrality where the perspective that was being presented was a truly balanced perspective. Now, it doesn't mean to say that you can't have an opinion. Some things are more right than wrong. There is a continuum on that, though. And so being able to explore both sides of those questions and those arguments becomes really important to be able to respond and deliver a message in a way that's going to be received well on the other side. Now, when it comes to the feedback perspective and that person receiving my feedback in a negative way, the question then gets to be, why was that received in a negative way? What was it that was happening for him that made the person react the way the person did? What's happening in the brain, and we've talked about this in previous videos, is you have the different sections. You've got your upper brain where we do our thinking, the midbrain where we have our emotional processing and memories, and we have the lower brain, which then brings us to react in whichever way our body is responding to the messages from the upper brain and the lower brain. Of course, this is a very simplistic model, but again, conceptually, it works well for what we're trying to accomplish here in terms of getting the basic concept across. When we are receiving feedback, as this individual did in that moment, that goes against the idea that we have in our mind and what we've decided to be true or right in that moment, what happens is that we get a trigger in the alignment center or the alignment detector of our brain, which is in this thinking part of our brain. What's happening is that it's receiving input, body language, words, tone from me as the deliverer of that message in that particular instance. And that person then is processing it and realizing there's misalignment here. Now, there are two options to respond to that. One is to just go with the automatic response. When there's misalignment, it triggers the threat detection center in the midbrain that I've talked about before. What it also does is it taps into the emotional memories in another section of that midbrain, which then reinforces the idea of it being a threat or of it being something that isn't threatening, it's just something to think about. So, depending on what our experiences have taught us in the past, criticism, as an example, triggers the emotional memory of having been criticized before and being made to feel belittled or whatever that is. In that instance, the threat detection center is not going to see it as a reasonable, logical, like, oh, that's just a different opinion to explore. It's going to see it as a threat, which is going to mobilize a response, which is going to be that reactive response that he had in that moment. Depending on how aware you are of your emotional memories, of your emotional triggers, of those emotional milestones as I talk about them, you will be able to have more or less control over whether or not you just mobilize into a response that is something comes in your head and it comes right out of your mouth without thinking. Or if you're going to be able to recognize that I have those triggers, I understand this is what I'm feeling right now, but this is not that incident from way long ago that imprinted that feeling and innate response within me. Instead, I'm going to ask questions because I realize this is a different instance, different context, different situation that deserves some sense of exploration and investigation to be able to think about and receive what's coming in, not as criticism, where the alignment center is triggering the threat detection center and moving me into a reactive response. It's rather the alignment center going to the threat detection center and saying, this is a safe situation. This is more of a dialogue that's maybe challenging me intellectually. So let me go back up into the upper brain and ask questions to try to work this through so that I can respond rather than react. That's what's happening in the brain. Those are the different pathways, and those are the different ways that we can see outcomes come from feeling as though we're being criticized, when in fact, that's an interpretation and a perception based on a belief that disagreement means that I'm wrong, means that I'm being threatened, therefore I need to react. The other interpretation of criticism as feedback being disagreement is that this is an opportunity to learn more. So, how do we overcome this when we understand what the implication is of being reactive and taking criticism as a personal insult so that we can instead take that criticism as feedback to then inspire more questioning and more learning about the situation? The key thing to that comes down to curiosity. Curiosity serves as the bridge from protective reaction to engaged learning. And by engaging and being goal directed in terms of wanting to learn more about something, we're able to stay regulated and away from the emotional reactive response that tips us into that reaction that can impact our credibility and take away the opportunity to learn more about something that could actually help us in our decision making. So, curiosity is that bridge. In addition to which, having the self awareness, being able to regulate, being able to recognize and regulate when you're being triggered and that this is linked to a previous experience, being able to temper that so that that experience doesn't take over the current moment, which is a completely different context. Those things become really important. To summarize, then, when we're receiving feedback and we're feeling criticized, reframe that. It's not criticism per se, it's feedback that is an opportunity for more learning. So that if I'm feeling heightened and triggered in that moment, recognize this is a new scenario, new context. Let's ask questions to help keep us grounded and away from that emotional reactive state into a learning mode that can actually help inform our decisions as we move forward so that whatever decisions we make, it's coming from a very grounded place. It's engaging the people around us. It's respecting other people's opinions because we're willing to hear them. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that you're being told, but it at least allows your mind to be receptive and to open up the opportunity for consideration so that when you respond instead of react, you not only maintain your credibility, but you build your credibility because you're demonstrating that you're able to receive ideas that are different from your own and disagreements that are perhaps coming to the forefront as the discussion evolves in a way that you can stay balanced, grounded, receptive, and lead with presence. That fosters trust, it fosters innovation, it fosters collaboration, all positive things that really helps create an environment where you can progress, grow, and make sure that people are feeling valued, appreciated, seen, and heard. In the next video, we're going to talk about giving feedback. How do you give people feedback in a way that's not going to inadvertently trigger that response in them that then makes them react in response? We'll talk about that in the next video. Thank you for taking the time to spend with me today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.